My parents told me I wasn't welcome at Easter this year because I always make things tense. The next morning, I got a CashApp request from my mom. It said $540. I stared at the screen, thinking it was a mistake. When I asked what it was for, she replied, "Your share for dinner." That one line hit harder than I expected. I wasn't invited, but they still wanted my money. I sat at my small kitchen table, phone in my hand, just staring at that message. I tried to laugh it off, but it didn't feel funny. It felt like the final push I didn't know I'd been waiting for. I'm 33, and I've spent most of my adult life trying to rebuild from the mess I escaped years ago. After my divorce, I started my own home renovation business. I fix things, walls, floors, cabinets, but nothing I build ever fixes how broken my family feels. My parents, Denise and Clark, never liked that I started over on my own. They said things like, "That's not a real job," or "You'll come running back when it fails." They never really saw me. To them, there's only one child worth admiring, my older brother, Dylan. He's the golden one, a real estate agent with a big smile and a fake laugh that everyone seems to love. And his wife, Marissa, plays her role perfectly, soft voice, perfect hair, pretending to care. My parents eat it up. I've always been the problem child. That's what they call me when I speak up, when I ask questions, or when I refuse to play along with their picture-perfect version of family. Every holiday turns into the same thing. Dylan making jokes at my expense, Mom telling me to keep the peace, and Dad sitting in silence like he's above it all. Last Easter, I brought a small pie I baked myself. Denise said, "You really didn't have to bring anything," but I could tell she didn't mean it kindly. Dylan said something about how I finally did something domestic, and everyone laughed. I remember driving home that night with tears running down my face, wondering why I still tried. So when they told me not to come this year, I thought maybe it was a relief. I could finally spend a quiet Sunday without pretending everything was fine. But that CashApp request made it different. It wasn't just about the money, it was about what it meant. They didn't just leave me out. They wanted me to pay for the privilege of being excluded. I put my phone down, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the ceiling. For once, I didn't cry. I didn't beg or explain. I just sat there, letting the anger settle into something cold and calm. Something inside me shifted that morning. I realized I'd spent years trying to earn a place in a family that didn't actually want me there. That was the day I stopped trying. I used to think maybe I was imagining it, that I was just too sensitive. But looking back, it was always the same story. Dylan was the responsible one, the one my parents bragged about to everyone they met. I was the difficult child, the one they had to explain away. Every time something went wrong, it somehow became my fault. When we were kids, I was the one who helped Dad fix the gutters, paint the porch, mow the lawn in the summer heat. Dylan would show up at the end, pretending to help, and Dad would pat his shoulder and say, "Good work, son." Then he'd turn to me and say, "You could learn a thing or two from your brother." I used to wonder what exactly I was supposed to learn, from someone who never lifted a finger. Mom wasn't any better. She liked control, but she did it in quiet ways. She'd comment on my clothes. "That color doesn't flatter you." Or my hair. "Are you really going out like that?" She'd make those little digs that sound like advice but feel like cuts. If I wore work boots, she said I looked rough. If I wore a dress, she'd smile and say, "Finally trying to look nice." There was no winning. She even found ways to criticize how I laughed. Once at dinner, I laughed too loud at something Dylan said, and Mom frowned. "You don't need to draw attention to yourself," she whispered. I was 12. After that, I started laughing quietly, covering my mouth, shrinking myself to fit whatever version of me they wanted that day. Dylan could do anything. He once crashed Dad's truck when he was 17, and they blamed me because I should have reminded him to fill the tank. When he dropped out of college for a year, Mom said, "He's just figuring things out." When I switched my major to construction management, she said, "That's not very feminine." It's strange how small things build up over time. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, that maybe they're just having a bad day. But after years of hearing the same tone, the same comparisons, it becomes a wall. Every word adds another brick until you can't even see the people on the other side anymore. I think the moment it finally clicked for me was when Dad came to see my first renovation project. I'd turned an old shed into a cozy home office. I was proud of it, the lighting, the floors, everything. He stood in the doorway, looked around, and said, "You did all this yourself?" When I nodded, he said, "You're lucky Dylan's business is doing well. Maybe he can help you get some real work." That sentence stuck with me for years. It didn't matter what I did. Dylan was always the example, and I was always the mistake. Maybe that's why the $540 request didn't shock me. It just proved what I'd known all along. In my family's eyes, I'd never be enough. I stared at the CashApp request again, hoping maybe I had read it wrong. But it was still there, $540 from Mom. I typed a short message asking what it was for. I waited, watching the typing bubble appear, then disappear, then appear again. Finally, her reply came through. We split dinner costs evenly. Just because you're not attending doesn't mean you're exempt. I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My hands were shaking a little. I wasn't even invited, but somehow, I still owed money for a dinner I wasn't allowed to attend. I stared at my phone screen until it dimmed and went dark. For a long moment, I didn't move. Part of me wanted to call her, to demand an explanation, to ask how she could possibly think this was fair. But I already knew how that conversation would go. She'd make me feel guilty, like I was being dramatic, like I'd misunderstood. And Dad would back her up, probably saying, "It's just money, Alyssa. Don't make a scene." I'd spent years walking away from fights like that. But this time, something in me went still. I didn't argue, didn't beg to be understood. I opened the chat and typed one word. Noted. Then I put my phone down and walked away from it. The house was quiet that night. Outside, the wind rattled the loose piece of siding I still hadn't fixed on the back porch. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to shake off the thought that wouldn't leave my mind. How far my parents would go just to remind me that I didn't belong. As I sat there, my eyes drifted to a box tucked in the corner of the living room closet. It was old, taped shut, with my father's handwriting on top. Years ago, when I bought my house, he'd asked me to store some of his extra paperwork. I never looked inside because I assumed it was just business files or tax stuff. But now, something about it caught my attention. Maybe it was the tone in Mom's message, or maybe I was just tired of feeling powerless. I pulled the box out, brushed off the dust, and cut the tape open with a utility knife. The smell of old paper and cardboard filled the air. Inside were folders, neat, labeled, and heavy. I sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through them. Receipts, loan forms, bank statements, most with my parents' names. But then I saw something strange. One folder had my name written on it in thick black marker, Alyssa C. Financial. My stomach tightened. I pulled it out slowly, my fingers trembling as I opened it. The first page I saw had my signature at the bottom. Only I didn't remember signing it. The folder with my name on it felt heavier than it should have. I sat on the floor, surrounded by old papers, my knees aching against the wood. I flipped through the first few pages, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Most of it looked like business paperwork, loan forms, contracts, and bank letters. But one line made my stomach tighten. My name, Alyssa Crane, listed as a co-signer on a business loan. I froze. I had never signed anything for Dylan or his company. I'd never even been asked. My eyes went to the bottom of the page where a signature was scrawled neatly in black ink. It looked like mine, but not quite. The loops were too careful. Someone had copied it. My hands went cold. I flipped through more pages, hoping I was wrong, but every document said the same thing. My name tied to Dylan Crane Realty LLC, a company I had nothing to do with. There were dates going back 3 years. Loan amounts in the tens of thousands. Interest building up. My signature was on every page. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. For a long moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. I thought about all those letters I'd been getting over the past few years. Credit warnings, confusing mail from banks, even a notice from the IRS about a late payment I didn't understand. I'd assumed it was spam or a mistake. But now it made sense. It wasn't a mistake. My father must have known. He was always the one dealing with family finances. He probably told Dylan it would be fine, that I'd never notice. They must have used my name, my good credit, to bail him out. The realization hit me like a wave of nausea. It wasn't just about favoritism anymore. This was theft. This was betrayal. I pulled out my laptop and opened my credit report, my hands trembling as I typed. When the results loaded, I felt my throat tighten. My score had dropped hundreds of points. There were multiple accounts I didn't recognize, all tied to Dylan's business. One of them had a massive unpaid balance. I couldn't even move for a while. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of what they'd done sink in. My own family had used my name like it was nothing, like I was just another tool for them to get what they wanted. I thought back to every time Mom said I owed the family, every time Dad brushed me off when I asked about weird mail. It all fit now. They hadn't just shut me out, they'd built their lives on top of mine. The anger started slow, like a burn that spread from my chest to my fingertips. I closed the laptop, stacked the papers neatly back into the folder, and set it on the table. For the first time in years, I wasn't just hurt. I was done being their victim. I drove to Cleveland because I needed someone who would not take my feelings for the whole story. Miles answered his office door like he had stepped out of an old photo. Same crooked smile, same easy way of listening. We sat at his cluttered desk, and I handed him the stack of papers without saying much. He read them quietly, then looked at me like he had read every line twice. He told me he could help, but he did not promise anything fancy. He explained things in plain language. He said the marks on the forms did not match natural handwriting. They had the smooth, copied look of a traced or scanned signature. He ran a few checks on his computer and pointed out a small clue. The ink and the way letters connected matched paperwork from a building permit I had filed years ago. In short, someone had used my old permit to make a new form look real. Hearing him put it like that made my head spin and then clear. It was not just carelessness or a family mistake. It was a deliberate choice. Miles went through the timeline with me, naming the few moments when those documents could have been taken or copied. He suggested where to look next and which offices might have originals we could compare. He was practical, calm, not shocked like people usually were. That steadiness helped. Miles warned me not to burn bridges by confronting anyone right away. He said the first thing to do was gather proof quietly, get certified copies of originals, make digital backups, note dates and phone calls, and keep a list of everything I found. He told me how fast tempers ruin a case and how slow, small steps build something that sticks. He also said to keep a copy of every text and email, and to write down conversations right after they happen. You want a paper trail, he said. Not a shouting match. As we left his office, I felt a mix of anger and focus. The fury that had felt wild the night before was now sharper and colder. Miles gave me a legal checklist and a little notebook. He said he would start by comparing the permit signature with the suspect's signature and would call a handwriting expert if needed. I looked at that list and felt something settle into me that felt like power. I thought of ways to make them answer without giving them the chance to gaslight me again. I did not picture dramatic revenge. I pictured patience, documents, and quiet reveals that could not be ignored. For the first time in a long time, my anger had a plan. I was not just hurt anymore. I was preparing to fix what they had broken, piece by careful piece. Easter morning came quietly. The sky was pale and cold, and my phone stayed silent on the counter. No messages, no calls. I didn't expect any. I made coffee and went straight to my workshop behind the house. The smell of wood and paint filled the air as soon as I opened the door. It was the only place that felt like mine. No memories I didn't want, no people trying to make me smaller. I pulled on my work gloves and turned on the sander. The loud hum filled the space and pushed every thought to the back of my head. I worked on a set of old cabinets a neighbor had asked me to refinish. The surface was rough and uneven, and I pressed the sander harder, letting the vibration run through my arms. The sound drowned everything else out for a while, until I noticed the radio I'd left playing low in the corner. The local station was talking about the annual real estate charity brunch. The announcer mentioned my family's name, saying the Crane family had hosted it again this year. They were honoring local success stories and raising money for housing programs. I froze. I could picture it perfectly. Mom smiling for the cameras, Dad shaking hands, Dylan giving his fake modest grin while taking credit for everything. I imagined Marissa in her pale pink dress, pretending she baked the desserts when she probably bought them. I didn't change the station. I just let it play while I worked. Each time I passed the workbench, I glanced at the folder I'd left open there. The copies of the forged loan documents lay flat under a small weight, so they wouldn't curl at the edges. My name was there, printed again and again, on things I never signed. It used to make my stomach twist to see it. Now it made me steady. The news reporter's voice faded into soft background music. I ran the sander one last time across the cabinet door and turned it off. The silence afterward felt thick. I pulled off my gloves, wiped the dust from my face, and looked at the papers again. I thought about how they were out there right now, smiling, laughing, pretending to be this perfect family, while my name sat under a mountain of lies that kept their world standing. For the first time, that thought didn't hurt. It just felt clear, like I could finally see all of them for who they really were. I picked up the papers, set them in a neat stack, and smoothed the top page with my palm. The faint lines of my forged signature caught the light. "Happy Easter," I whispered. The words came out soft, almost calm. I placed the papers back down, switched off the radio, and listened to the stillness that followed. It felt like the start of something new, quiet, certain, and mine. The morning after Easter, I sat at my kitchen table with the papers spread out in front of me. The sun came through the window, hitting the edge of the stack like it was pointing at what I had to do. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. I had been awake most of the night, thinking about what to send, what to say, and how to make sure they could never twist the truth again. I pulled a clean sheet of paper from my printer and began to write. My handwriting was slow and even. The words came easily, almost like I had been waiting years to say them. "You told me I ruin holidays. Maybe you should look at what you've ruined." That was all I wrote. No long explanations, no anger spilling over. Just the truth in one simple line. I folded the note carefully and slid it into a certified envelope along with copies of the forged documents. My name, my fake signature, the loan information, all of it. I sealed it, pressed my thumb over the flap, and addressed it to my parents' house. When I got to the post office, the clerk asked if I wanted delivery confirmation. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. Watching the clerk stamp the envelope felt strange, like I was closing a chapter that had been opened too long. Back home, I started on the rest. I scanned every document, making sure nothing was left out. Then I filled 3 more envelopes. One for the State Attorney General's office, one for the licensing board that managed real estate brokers, and one for the bank that issued the loans. Each packet had a short summary note and copies of the forged papers. I kept everything clean, calm, and professional. No emotion, no story, just facts. When I mailed those envelopes, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even feel nervous. It wasn't revenge for me, it was correction. For years, they had built this fake picture of who they were, pretending everything they owned came from hard work and honesty. But every piece of paper told a different truth, one they'd tried to bury under family pride and lies. Back at home, I sat on the couch and stared at my hands. They were steady, the way they were when I worked with tools. I felt a quiet kind of peace, like the calm after a storm, before the world realizes what's been washed away. I imagined the moment they'd open that envelope. Mom's face going pale, Dad going silent, Dylan trying to talk his way out of it. For once, there'd be no argument they could win, no story they could spin. The truth was on paper now, signed in ink, and this time, it was all theirs to face. A week passed before I heard anything. It started with a short news report on the radio about a local real estate firm being under investigation. They didn't say the name at first, but I knew. Within hours, the full story broke online. Dylan's brokerage license had been suspended while the state looked into financial irregularities. The next day, there was another update. My father's company was being audited. Their accounts were frozen while the bank reviewed the loan paperwork. Everything I had sent out was working its way through the system, piece by piece. I didn't have to lift a finger anymore. The truth was doing all the work. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mom. I let it ring twice before I answered. Her voice was shaky, already breaking before she spoke. "Alyssa, please," she said. "You're destroying us. Do you understand what you've done?" Her words came fast and desperate. She talked about money, reputation, how Dylan couldn't go to work, how Dad was furious and didn't know how to fix it. She said everything except the one thing that mattered, sorry. I waited until she stopped talking. Then I said, "You destroyed me first." My voice came out steady, almost quiet. I didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't explain. There was nothing left to explain. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, soft and uneven, like she was waiting for me to take it back. I didn't. After a moment, the line went dead. I stood there for a while, holding the phone in my hand. Then I set it down and walked to my workshop. The afternoon light was coming through the window, hitting the wood shavings on the floor, turning them gold. I sat on the stool and watched the dust float in the light. For the first time, I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel small. I just breathed. The air smelled like sawdust and sunlight. I realized this was what freedom felt like, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and solid. I didn't need them to understand anymore. The truth had already spoken for me. I had thought the worst was behind me, but the truth kept unfolding in ways I hadn't imagined. The investigation into the forgery didn't just clear my name. It dug deeper, exposing secrets that shook everyone connected to the case. Dylan, my business partner, finally cracked under pressure. He admitted everything, revealing that Clark, not me, had orchestrated the forgery. Clark had done it to protect Dylan's company, but I had been left in the middle, carrying the blame and the debt I didn't deserve. For me, the revelation was both a relief and a shock. I had been fighting for years, struggling to prove my innocence while my life seemed to collapse around me. Now, not only was I cleared of all debt, but I also received compensation for the losses and damages I had suffered. It was a victory I hadn't dared to hope for, yet it felt bittersweet. My parents, who had judged me harshly and demanded loyalty to appearances, were not so fortunate. The investigation revealed their failures, and they lost their home, a symbol of the life they had built on lies and expectations. Afterward, Dylan reached out to me. His messages were full of desperation, apologies, and excuses. He blamed our father for everything, claiming he had no choice and begging for forgiveness. I read his words quietly, but my heart wasn't moved. I had endured too much to be swayed by empty apologies. Eventually, I agreed to meet him, curious only to hear him out, not to reconcile. We met at a small diner, ordinary enough to feel safe and removed from the chaos of our family's lives. Dylan spoke quickly, trying to explain, to make me understand how he had been trapped by loyalty and fear. He begged me to forgive him, to see the situation from his perspective. I listened in silence, my hands wrapped around my coffee cup. I watched him struggle, wrestle with guilt and pride, and then finally I spoke. "You always wanted everything I had," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Now you can have the consequences, too." There was no anger in my words, only clarity. I wasn't lashing out. I was simply stating the truth, the reckoning that had finally come for everyone who had tried to manipulate my life. Without another word, I left the diner, leaving Dylan staring after me. For the first time, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. I had survived the lies, the betrayal, and the chaos. I had faced everyone who had wronged me and come out unbroken. My future was finally mine to reclaim, and this time, I would build it on my own terms. Months after everything had settled, I got a CashApp notification. I saw that $540 had been sent to me from an anonymous account. I knew immediately who it was from, Denise. I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers hovered over the buttons, but I didn't accept it. I didn't decline it either. I just left it pending. It felt strange, holding money that came from someone who had hurt me in ways that went far beyond cash. That $540 wasn't just money. It was a small reminder of everything I had gone through with my family. Their love had always been conditional, fleeting, and unreliable. I realized that, just like this money, I could leave their care and approval pending too. I didn't need it to move forward. I put my phone down and went back to my workshop. The familiar scent of sawdust filled the air, and the weight on my chest began to lift a little. I picked up a piece of wood and ran my hands over its smooth surface. Sanding it down, shaping it carefully, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, control over my own life. Each stroke of the sandpaper was like pushing away the past, the pain, the lies, the disappointment. Working with my hands grounded me in a way nothing else had. The world outside my workshop felt heavy, but in here, everything was simple. I could see the results of my effort, and it belonged entirely to me. No one could take it away, no one could judge it. I felt clean in a way I hadn't before. Clean from the chaos, the arguments, and the years of trying to prove myself to people who didn't understand me. I glanced at my phone again, but I didn't touch it. That $540 could stay pending forever. It wasn't mine yet, and maybe it never needed to be. What mattered was the moment I had right now, in the quiet, with the sawdust in the air and the wood beneath my hands. For the first time, I felt free, steady, and completely myself. I knew that this feeling, not money or apologies, was what I had been waiting for all along.